I'm going to test this. Let's see on the new YouTube channel. We should be live. There we go. Now I can see it.
Working? Okay.
Yeah. Thanks.
All right. Do we want to give time for people to jump on, or do we have?
Live. There we go. Now I can see it.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, I better mute that.
Okay. So we've got. Do we want to give time for people to jump on, or do we have?
Yeah, I'm hearing your video in the background.
Yep. 1 second.
I better mute that.
Okay. So we got.
Yeah, I'm hearing your video in the background.
Yep. Okay, that should be gone. All right. So everything good? Should we give it a few minutes or just go through with the recording? Lisa, are you there?
Yeah, I was just on mute for a moment. Let's just give a few. We got 13 viewers coming, so they are joining us.
Okay.
This is great. I'm going to go back on mute and try to make sure that I inform everybody.
Okay.
Thanks. We are able to see the migrating the ServiceNow scoped app HR on the Google or YouTube Hangout. So, and we have people who've told us, Gloria and Ray have also said they see it. So
Okay.
I think we got 13 coming. So let's. I say let's go ahead and go.
Okay. So for those, thanks. Sorry for the technical difficulties, everyone. I'll kind of skim through the slides. I know I did for those who were on the intro who missed that initial. So again, I'm Kyle Sanders. I'm a product manager within our HR business unit supporting our HR product here at ServiceNow. So we're going to be reviewing the HR scoped application today, really with the goal of giving you the information to help plan your migration to the latest scope release. So we'll start off by reviewing the scoped application just to give you some details on what all that encompasses. We'll also look at the migration plugin that was released to see how it can be leveraged to assist with the migration. And then we'll also highlight a high-level review of the recent roadmap items as they relate to the scoped app. And then we'll have time for Q&A. And again, just if you do have any questions during the session, just enter them in the discussion thread on Community. You guys have done a great job so far with just posting when we were having some audio issues or some video issues, so thank you. So for those who missed it, what is scoping? So it's important to define that because this is a ServiceNow term, this may be something that you may not be familiar with. So there is an additional level of security on top of the role security, and it helps to kind of put a container around the application. And really what this does is it provides, so the scoped application can change its own tables, but not necessarily any of the applications outside of the HR application or the scoped application. So what does this mean for HR? So HRSD, you also see it HR Service Delivery or HRSM or HR Service Management. It's all referring to the same thing. It's ServiceNow's HR product. So it's now a scoped application starting in Istanbul. And the big benefit is it gives HR the autonomy and control that they need. So we often heard that HR organizations were asking for additional control over their data. and they wanted to make sure to protect that, especially with a lot of data privacy laws going into play, making sure that really the people who should be accessing that data are have access to it. And the other piece of that is HR also wanted to administer their own content instead of having to kind of wait in an IT queue to kind of get some of their development done. So that's where the scoped application comes into play. And the big advantage is IT loves this also because it takes work off of their plate, but it still provides the kind of sense of security around what HR can manage versus what they should be and what IT is responsible for. So with the HR service delivery, it does maintain a separate set of roles. So there's an HR admin role, and that's kind of what I was talking about earlier, is it gives them the ability to really manage more of their own content. And then also the platform admin, it prevents them from accessing kind of within the HR application because there is kind of that separate role now, and it prevents them from accessing certain areas of the HR application that can contain sensitive HR data. There's also the option of designated developer. So this is another ServiceNow item that can be used across kind of the platform as well. But it's used to help grant almost like an elevated level of access to HR admins if they're also going to be responsible for certain development tasks. So if they're going to be doing any custom scripting, anything like that, there's an additional designated developer role or kind of content that they can be added. And I will we'll review that of what exactly does that grant them in addition, and kind of how does that elevate their access. Well, we'll talk about that here in a second. Also, there is, along with the scoped application, when we were talking data security, there's also the ability that when a system admin, and when I say system admin, more of like the IT admin or what's granted as the admin role, when they try to impersonate an HR user, that'll actually, there's still security built around it to still prevent them from seeing some of that HR data that HR user would have. And then also around the benefits of the scoped HR application, the big ones are, as we mentioned, better control over just who can access that sensitive HR data. And it really gives HR the ability to manage their own content and really kind of have ownership and responsibility over it. So they can then be a little more agile with getting content outdated or updated so that they don't have to wait in a queue to kind of get things done. And IT and HR can really partner together on the actual use of the system. Another big benefit that's not necessarily related to scoping, but it does come and it is kind of related to the scoped application, is the COE case model. And we'll talk about this later in the session, but it's something that's really beneficial, especially around the security that we've been discussing. And then the additional benefit is continued access to new functionality for the future releases. So we'll talk about it in the next slide here, but really the benefit of the scoped application is that that's where all of our current development is going. So all of our future content and functionality is all built within this scoped HR application. So for those of you who are more technical on the line, wanted to jump into kind of a high-level overview of what does this mean from a technical perspective? How did this change from an infrastructure of what the non-scoped application is versus what the scoped application is? So as I mentioned, scoping is a ServiceNow term, so there's new scopes that have been introduced, and therefore the HR core and then these other items depending on what products are owned. And then these scopes kind of, like I said, act as almost containers for those specific areas. So whoever has all the content created within HR core can kind of be managed by someone with that access, but not necessarily someone with the global admin IT access or someone with employee service center. So it allows you to kind of really segment your data and help control who can administer certain areas. There are also new tables created within the HR scope. So you have your HR case table within your current application. There's a new version of the HR case table within the scoped application. They're essentially the same as far as tables, but the actual table name in that changes because there are some additional ACLs built around those tables as well. And just a lot of the different security, they are two separate tables. And what that means is that also the HR scoped application is a separate plugin as well. So the plugin that you have currently for the HR application is separate from the new one. So when you're ready to move to it, one of the steps is activating that new plugin. And then, as I mentioned, the designated developer access can be given to grant additional development access. And we'll talk about that here in these next couple slides. So what can the HR admin role configure? And this list is not all inclusive, but this is kind of a listing, a high level of some important features that HR admin can actually, someone with the HR admin can manage and configure. And the purpose of this is really to make HR more self-sufficient at managing their own content and allowing them to really kind of work within the HR application as they need to without having to actually go and customize or do any true development. And the HR application has actually been built with that mindset for easier configurations since it's more targeted towards HR as opposed to IT. And customizations are all still possible with the platform. It's just not as necessary with HR. And those items marked down below that are required as designated developer, those are the items that kind of come with that escalated level of access if you were to grant the HR admin access to designated developer as well. So a high-level overview of what the HR admin cannot configure, it would be more of the foundational items within the platform. So any of the items that would impact other areas typically are more locked down, and also more of the technical items as well. So anything that could potentially impact more of the platform or any other applications, that's where it's going to still require a partnership with HR and IT to really kind of determine requirements and build off of that. I have a couple links here at the bottom. These are link out to our product documentation that really cover what they can and can't do in more detail. As I mentioned, this is a high-level overview. This is not all-inclusive of what they can and can't do, but the documentation does cover all of that in detail. So what does this mean for your organization on the non-scoped HR application? So there are no plans to decommission or sunset the non-scoped HR application at this time. However, all product development since Istanbul has been occurring within the scoped application. So in order to take on new functionality and continue to mature your deployment of HR, it's still beneficial to start considering the migration to the scoped app. And the scoped application was released in Istanbul, but it's not tied to a release upgrade, which kind of gives you the ability to really migrate at your own schedule. You can take, for example, Jakarta or Kingston without migrating to the scoped HR application, since they are separate plugins. However, with that approach, you would not receive the additional HR functionality that would come with Jakarta or Kingston until you are on that scoped application, since that is where that development and features have been being built. And then another common question we get is, are there any additional licensing costs to migrate? So customers licensed for HR using the non-scoped HR application are still entitled to HR case management and knowledge management within the scoped app. The Employee Service Center or the Enterprise Onboarding and Transitions or any other future products, those are all part of their additional applications that have been released, and so they therefore require the appropriate licenses for them. And many customers are actually using this migration as an opportunity to kind of expand their service delivery using one of these new products, because there are some changes and some that need to go into the migration process. They're using that opportunity to actually configure additional upon that to actually deploy the Employee Service Center or some additional functionality as well. And if you have any questions about this, you can certainly reach out to your account executive, and they can help address any of these questions you may have. So as I mentioned, there is a migration tool that has been released. So we'll talk about that here next. The migration plugin or migration tool is released in Jakarta, and it is released as a separate plugin that can be enabled if you want. You don't have to use this if you're going through the migration. However, it is available to help assist. So it does assist by running through it creates a report to identify the changes. It maps the tables and data fields, and then it also migrates data and roles. And we'll dive into this a little bit more as well. So it's also important to mention that the migration plugin is not all-encompassing. We talk about it'll help you assist it, but it's not going to do the entire work for you. So there's some important things to be aware of. So it will not migrate HR cases and tasks. And that's not saying that you're going to lose access to your cases. It's just that they're still going to exist in the non-scoped HR table. Some customers have chosen to actually migrate those over, while I would say a majority of our customers have chosen to keep them on that legacy table and then make any changes for reporting as necessary, and then kind of make a clean cutover date where everything is going to start occurring in the scoped app. And then maybe they'll give read-only access for a period of time to those older cases. But generally, most customers are choosing to kind of make a clean cutover and not have to migrate all that those old cases. Because one thing to think about is it's not just the case; it's all of the associated items that are related to that as well that you would have to deal with. And then HR services, templates, and record producers. These are also not included within the migration. However, we've added a lot of out-of-the-box services that overlap with a lot of what customers have been building. So I want to say as of Jakarta, it's about 50 plus HR services that are included out of the box. So many customers are finding that they can just leverage those and kind of make some modifications to them based on their needs. And then the HR templates and record producers, you'll still have them like the cases on the original. So you could still potentially use them if you're changing, if you would want to probably recreate them in the scope, depending on who's going to be managing them. But you can use those and kind of link them back to the new scoped catalog items or however you're going to be creating those. And then workflows, business rules, really any of that custom script items, as well as any additional custom development. None of those items are included within the migration tool. Migration tool is really intended to migrate data. It's more of to migrate a lot of the standard table data. So any of these customizations, this is something that you'll be responsible for updating. But I do recommend any type of custom development or any type of things that you have built like this to really review what it is that you've built compared to what's out of the box. Because if you're coming from Helsinki being the latest version of the non-scoped app, and you're moving to Jakarta or Kingston, there's been quite a few changes that have happened within the HR application. So we find that many customers have built custom development, but a lot of it aligns closely with what we've released in recent products or recent releases. So they don't necessarily have to re-implement or make any changes to that. They can just use the out-of-the-box functionality instead of having to migrate some old customizations. So I'd strongly recommend kind of comparing side by side what you're currently doing versus what's out of the box, as well as what are your pain points? Where are the areas that you want to possibly change? Kind of make those changes. Use this as an opportunity to fix some of those with your lessons learned. And then a note at the bottom here, definitely important not to get overlooked, is that the HR portal, if you are using the Employee Service Center or the HR Service Portal, there is a new widget called My Legacy Cases that can be used to view the old cases within the global application, depending on your how you choose to proceed with migrating cases. So using the migration plugin, these are kind of the high-level steps, and we'll step through them here in the next slides as well. So the first step, assuming that we're on Jakarta already, because again, it was released within Jakarta, so it starts whether we're on Jakarta or a later release. The first thing is to activate the plugin. So there's a data migration plugin, and that will enable this HR migration application within the nav menu. And from there, you want to review the data mappings that are provided out of the box. And these maps, they cover all of the standard tables that are included within the migration. And if there are any custom tables that you have built within HR that should be the data within there should be migrated, you can still create the table. You can still use the migration tool for that. You would just want to create the table in the scoped application and then use the migration tool to then add the columns to this mapping. And this mapping covers the tables. It covers the columns within the table. And then it even covers the choice lists within those columns if necessary. The next step of the migration process is once you've compared all of the, done all the mapping and compared everything and the mapping looks correct for you, you can run the pre-migration report. And this compares the out-of-the-box HR tables from the non-scoped HR application with the scoped version. And this can be run multiple times. We'll talk about it here in one of the next slides. But this is something that can be run multiple times. And once you generate that, it'll create, here on the screen, you can see there will be a pre-migration report that you can click into to view. This is an example of what that migration report would look like. And it's really used to identify any changes between the out-of-the-box table schema and what you're currently using. And there is an action column here. And once the change, this allows you to really choose whether you want to accept or skip those changes. So whether you want to migrate it over into the new scope tables, or if you want to skip it, maybe it's a field that was previously used, but it's no longer necessary, and you just need to skip it. You don't even want to bring it into the scoped application. So once you select the appropriate action in that column, you select that, and then there will be a button that shows up here, the Start Migration. That'll be enabled, and you can click that to proceed. That'll bring you into the data migration screen, and this will just highlight. On the left here, you see these are the scoped or the non-scoped tables. These are the scoped tables and how they're going to be mapped. And then this will allow you to run the migration. So you can run table by table, or you can just migrate everything at once. And this is where that pre-migration report, running it multiple times, can help. So if you migrate all of the data and then you decide you make a few changes to the table, you can run that pre-migration report again, and it'll just catch all of the deltas. However, once you start migrating some of the data, you can't run the pre-migration report again until you migrate all of the tables here. Once all of the tables are migrated, you'll want to run the role migration, because just like with the tables, there's new scoped versions of the roles, and those are all part of the mapping as well. So if you need to change any of the mapping of how the roles are going to be set up, there's information on that, and you can choose to change that mapping as well. The role migration works very similar, where you can just migrate the roles based on the mapping, and then once you're done with that, that is the kind of the entirety of the migration tool. And I know we ran through it very quickly, so there isn't out on the community. I want to highlight there is a video that you can walk through that will highlight, and kind of it's a true walkthrough of it. It's about 10 minutes long, but it kind of covers all of the areas that we looked at here, but it's a live walkthrough. So for those who are not on Jakarta yet, it gives you the opportunity to see what that looks like and how it can work for you. Along those same lines, out in the community, there's also an HR scoped application FAQ page. And this has a lot of questions and answers that we hear from customers as we kind of talk through this. And this will hopefully help answer many of the questions you may have. If there's anything that you don't, that is not addressed, feel free to post any in here or the discussion thread for this conversation or for this session, and we'll be monitoring that to make sure those get addressed. And then to add to that, this is a living document. So this is something that as we learn more and hear common questions from customers, we will be updating this too. So keep an eye on it. If you've looked at it already, it's worth revisiting because there may have been changes added to it. And for those who do follow the community, or follow the HR service delivery community page, you should receive notices whenever this page is updated if there is additional content added to it. Next up is the roadmap items. And like I said, this will be just a high-level overview, but it's important to highlight these because, as I mentioned, all of our future development from Istanbul and beyond has been within the scoped application. So you may be on Jakarta, but you're missing out on some functionality because of that. You're not on the scoped application yet. So if you move to the scoped application in, say, Jakarta or even Kingston, you'll have 3 releases of new functionality that you can take advantage of right away. So with Istanbul, and again, there's release notes out on our documentation site. So this isn't all inclusive, but these are kind of a highlight of some of the items that have been released. The big ones being the scoped app, the introduction of the scoped application, and then the case categorization with the COE structure. So this is that COE model that we were talking about earlier. And this is something that's important to review and really understand while you're going through the migration, because the cases and categorization and how everything kind of works does change slightly. This new model kind of helps to automate case assignment and security, improve reporting, give a better experience for your end users. It really helps a lot. Think of the HR services as almost the request type, or kind of what your typical request is now. So examples here on the right side, 401k enrollment, tuition reimbursement. Those are items that are kind of the request items, and those kind of help to, again, automate the case assignment, but can also provide templates associated to that. So it can help make sure that the actual case form for the employee or the agent working that has the appropriate information. They have the fulfillment instructions that are needed to actually work the case. But really, the HR service is that request type. And because this is set up as a hierarchy, by selecting the HR service, the system will automatically know what the category, the topic detail, really kind of all these other items. So they no longer need to care about what's the category for the employee. They don't need to know how things are categorized, because it's all based on the HR service, and that service drives everything else. And then at the very top here, we have the Center of Excellence, or the COE. And this is almost, these are extensions of the HR case table into kind of these different COEs. So you see we've got total rewards, employee relations, payroll, workforce admin. I believe we had a talent management one in Jakarta. So these all help to create additional tables that are extended from HR case. So the fact that they're extended provides all of the benefits that HR case has as far as features and functionality, but the extension allows customers to really build upon that table. So whether they want different fields that are specific to it. So maybe under total rewards, you want, there's a 401k enrollment or benefit plan. There can be fields that are unique to that case. So the HR case table doesn't have to have hundreds of new fields to it. It can be specific to the case that's actually, or the table that's actually that service sits on. And then the other added benefit is around security. So since these are separate tables, the system is set up now where these are separate tables. So if you did want to build any additional security on, for example, employee relations, you could leverage the structure that we have already to add and define what your security should look like for those who are employee relation cases. So maybe you only want employee relations to be seen by a small subset who supports those cases. you can now build that security using the structure that we have here with the COEs out of the box. And then just going back to this, just to reiterate, it's important as you're starting to migrate some of your content, really build it with kind of within this structure, because this HR service really does drive a lot within this platform, and it does help to automate a lot. So if you're not using something similar with different request types, for example, if you have just a general inquiry, it's important to start considering and thinking about this concept, because being able to have this HR service is now supported really heavily within this COE model that we have in the scoped application, and you can really benefit a lot from it. So these are the features and functionality that have been released in Jakarta. And again, the big ones being the migration plugin that we talked about, enterprise onboarding and transitions. It does require a separate licensing SKU. And then also the bulk case creation. So that was a feature that many customers have asked for. It's now available in Jakarta and allows you to kind of mass create cases for users based on specific services. And you can really define who those users are. You've got a lot of flexibility, whether you're using information from their user profile or their user account, their HR profile, whether you're uploading a file, a lot of flexibility with that. And then with Kingston, we have out on the release notes or out on the product site, we've got the release notes here. The big ones that I'm excited for are task reminder notifications and service activity enhancements for approvals. So with that, I want to open it up for questions. I know there were some that were popping up on the community earlier, so want to make sure to address those. And if you do have any questions, just a reminder, there is a conversation thread related to this discussion out on the community where you can post your questions. Lisa, has any questions come in yet?
Haven't seen any more from, are you following the live chat on the YouTube?
Yes.
Okay, great, because I think you answered the scope application, the additional licensing, and then somebody pointed out about your note at the bottom. It was very important. And on the community, we have some people who have asked some questions, a very large one. This is from Pascal. It says, currently on Jakarta, still using Helsinki HRSM application. We're looking to migration to a scoped HR app and have a couple questions. When activating the migration plugin on dev instance, was there a notice that a subscription would be required for production instances?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think we talked a little bit about the licensing of it. So there is no licensing required as long as you're just kind of moving from what you currently own to what you into the scoped application. So if you're trying to activate any additional functionality that you aren't licensed for, like the Employee Service Center or onboarding and transitions, that's something you would want to talk to your account executive about. The notice that you're probably seeing is just kind of a warning within the dev environment, letting you know that it is a feature or product that does require licensing. So if you're not licensed to it, it will not let you activate that in production. So that's more of a warning. It's not necessarily saying that you don't have access to it. It's more of letting you know that if you don't, you're going to have some difficulty activating it in production. You can always check with your account executive if you have any concerns about that, and they can talk you through it and kind of help elaborate on that.
Okay, I think you also answered this question. Until which release will the migration tool be available? For example, they decide to postpone the migration to next year after an upgrade to London, or its successor, will we still have the migration tool available to aid?
Yes, you will. It's available introduced in Jakarta as a plugin, but it will be available for the foreseeable future as a plugin to be used.
Okay. Do they need to redo all their customizations in the scoped app?
I think we kind of addressed this, and I hope that answered your question, but most of the customizations, depending on what they are, you will need to redo them. It doesn't necessarily mean you need to start from scratch. A lot of it comes down to repointing the tables, so you may need to change it from pointing to the HR case table to the scoped HR case table. And then just making sure all the fields that are referenced are the same. There may be some kind of syntax changes within any code or customization that you'll need to review within a scoped application, but that should be relatively minimal. And then there's also you may want to create some items within the new scope. So really everything you have right now sits in the global scope. So if you want to move it into the HR scope, that's going to allow whoever has that HR admin role to be able to administer it. So if you're going to have a separate structure where there's going to be a true HR admin who's going to administer that content now, that content needs to sit in the HR scope. However, we have some customers who HR application is still going to be owned by IT. So they didn't necessarily migrate all of that content into the scope. They kind of repointed the tables to make sure everything was referencing correctly, but the actual scope of it still remained the same because it was still going to be administered by the same group.
And the old HRSM app will remain as a legacy app. Does this mean they'll have to keep both apps in production instance indefinitely?
Yes, because it's a separate plugin, it'll still remain. You can remove the access from users and remove it from the nav menu if you want. The plugin will remain activated, but there won't be really any negative impacts to that.
Okay, that's great. I'll check one more time on the live chat and see if there's any other questions. Are you seeing any there?
I think.
Okay. Well, I do want to thank everyone for their patience today and switching over very quickly. Again, if you have any other questions to ask, please post them on the link on the community, and you know, our experts will come in and answer them for you. Oh, wait, there's two more. Can we create custom COEs?
Yes, you can create COEs off as extensions off of the HR case. If you post some information or was that one from the chat, or was that in the? This
is from the live chat. Yes, not on the community.
Yeah, if you can post that comment in there, we can provide some more information as a reply to that as well.
Okay, great. And then can a custom table be moved? Yeah, you've already said that. Mm-hmm. Perfect. All right, I don't see any other questions, but I do thank everyone again, and I'll make sure I put in the link for the community thread.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Thank you. See you on the community.
Yep. Bye.